Daily Telegraph columnist Allison Pearson is no stranger to outrage. In fact, it's her speciality, with column after column aimed at riling up the tempers of the paper's conservative readers. Or we shouldn't imply her motives, actually, which seem to be aimed to rile up their readers. Now, though, she's found herself at the centre of a media storm after publishing this piece last week. So it says, "My visit from police on Remembrance Sunday is living proof of our two-tier justice system." Now, in that column, Pearson says she was told that the police had knocked at her door to investigate, quote, "a non-crime hate incident." Now, so this does sound very odd, a non-crime hate incident. Now, that's a phrase she used again when describing what happened to Talk TV's Julia Hartley-Brewer.
Two young coppers, and they said, we're here about a non-crime hate incident, which I have sort of vaguely heard about before. And he said it related to a tweet of a year ago, which was stirring up racial hatred, he said. And I said, oh, that's very interesting. What did it say, the tweet that you think was stirring up racial hatred? And he said, I'm not allowed to tell you that. And then
God forbid you should know what you're actually being accused of.
God forbid I should know, exactly. And then I said, who is my accuser, which is the next question. And then he said, we're not allowed to tell you that either, but it's not an accuser, it's the victim.
So Pearson's story has been very, very prominent in the media over the past few days. The Telegraph ran 2 front pages featuring her tale, with other right-wing outlets chipping in too. An ex-owner, Elon Musk, got involved, posting this needs to stop. And he's quote tweeting Peter Sweden, saying that British police visited and questioned a journalist in her home because someone was offended by a year-old post on X. Yes, in Soviet Britain, you get interrogated for posting on Twitter. Even Prime Minister Keir Starmer had a response to the story. Asked about Pearson's tweet at the G20 summit in Brazil, Starmer urged police to, quote, concentrate on what matters most to their communities. Potentially a smart response, I think, from him. But what had Pearson actually tweeted? Well, late last week, The Guardian reported that it had spoken to the person who reported Pearson to the police. And this is alleged to be the post in question. So reposting a photograph of police officers standing with a group of people holding the flag of a mainstream Pakistani political party, Pearson wrote, "How dare they, at Met Police, invited to pose with lovely, peaceful British friends of Israel on Saturday, police refused. Look at this lot smiling with the Jew haters." Now, as you can see there, the tweet was seen over 410,000 times before it was deleted by Pearson. Now, that image didn't involve the Met Police. It was taken in Manchester, and it had nothing to do with Israel's war on Gaza, given it was taken in August 2023. If that is the tweet in question, then it appears to be Allison Pearson just describing a random group of Asian people as Jew haters to her audience. The person who made the police report explained to The Guardian why they'd done it, saying this: "Each time an influential person makes negative comments about people of colour, I, as a person of colour, see an uptick in racist abuse towards me, and the days after that tweet are no different." So I suppose the days after that tweet are no different. The idea that this complainant themselves saw an uptick in racist abuse because of that tweet by Allison Pearson, I can see why, the connection doesn't seem completely obvious there, although I can see the broad point. It also turned out that Allison Pearson may have got some of the details of the police visit to her home, a year later, wrong. Now, remember how she'd called it a, quote, non-crime hate incident? Well, transcripts of body cam footage revealed by Essex police appear to tell a different story, with the officer telling Pearson this: "It's gone down as an incident or offence of potentially inciting racial hatred online. That would be the offence. Because of what's been alleged and the evidence that we've got, I need to just ask you some questions." So inciting racial hatred online, that's not a non-crime. That would be a real crime. Essex police say Pearson is under investigation for an alleged breach of the 1986 Public Order Act. It's not to say she has committed a crime, but they were interviewing her not necessarily over a non-crime incident, but there is a law that they were investigating whether she had broken it. Speaking to LBC, Essex Police Commissioner Roger Hurst explained why he believed Pearson's tweet was worthy of investigation.
We can't go around ignoring crimes just because it's politically sensitive. And we perhaps need to just think about how our Black and Asian communities are hearing this debate. After all, the 1986 Public Order Act defines this as a crime. And the maximum sentence, the normal measure of crime severity is on the maximum sentence. The maximum sentence is 7 years. That puts it up there well ahead of shoplifting. It's fairly evident, isn't it, really, that it's not been treated as a high priority. It's taken a year to actually go and knock on the door. But nevertheless, this is something which has to be dealt with by due process.
The force has also complained to press regulator Ipso over the factual accuracy of some of the reports on the case. So they think this has been reported poorly.
The first thing is that if you want to talk about freedom of speech issues and how they impact British journalists, I think the first place you've really got to look is the way in which counter-terror laws have been wielded against journalists regarding things they've said about or their coverage of the genocide in Gaza. Now, one of the things that's really, really important about the Terrorism Act is that there are not exemptions in the legislation for journalistic activities, and how support for a prescribed terror organization is defined is really, really broadly. Now, I know you know this, Michael, because it's something that we've got to discuss a lot when it comes to our own coverage, which is one of the really sticky parts of that legislation, is that you can be, arrested, prosecuted for breaching the Terrorism Act if something that you say is interpreted as reckless as to whether it may cause support in another person for a prescribed terrorist organization. So it doesn't have to be someone like you or I saying, oh, I really think you should support Hamas or Hezbollah or the PIJ. It could be, could someone interpret this thing that I'm saying, which may include analysis of news events, as being reckless as to whether or not it would cause someone else to support those prescribed terrorist organizations? Now, that is something, that is a bit of legislation which has been used in recent months. Journalists have been detained. They've been investigated. It's unclear to me what the outcome is of some of those things. And I've not seen mainstream newspapers, LBC, rally round a journalist saying, oh, look at this is awful, this is against free speech. All right, so that's the first thing which I'd really point out, which is, for me, that is one of the most egregious bits of police overreach that we've seen in recent months. So having said that, let's get to Allison Pearson. I'm going to separate two things. One is what I think about I guess, involving the police, and the other is about what I think about Allison Pearson as a journalist. I'm going to start with what I think about Allison Pearson as a journalist. I think that Allison Pearson is everything that's wrong with British journalism. And if she decided to take a nice quiet retirement, I don't know, take up Chihuahua breeding or something, I think that the industry would be a lot better for it. I mean, I think you look through her opinion pieces. For me, I think that they demonstrate a degree of conspiracism, a strong tone of conspiracism, in my opinion. I think that she has a real two-tier system of morality. So if something involves people who are being accused of being far right, or indeed the horrific events of this past summer and the racist rioting, she goes out of her way to, in my view, minimize and humanize those people. Whereas when it comes to, for instance, transgender people, LGBT activists, Muslims, people who are pro-Palestine, well, it's all guns a-blazing. I think that her work is awful. And I think that part of the reason why she got caught out with this tweet is because I don't think that she has particularly high journalistic values. Right? It's like it fits the narrative. I'm going to put it out. Now, obviously, everyone can get caught short of that at one time or another. But I think that this particular tweet calling completely, random, uninvolved, Pakistanis Jew haters, I think that's emblematic of a broader problem in her journalistic practice. The next question is whether or not that's a matter for the police. Now, I do think that a tweet like that demonstrates racism. That's my opinion. I think that it shows the way in which allegations of anti Semitism and Jew hatred have been used by sections of our press and our politics to smear Muslims and South Asians in particular. It's, a nice synonym for Muslim when you can't say that. I think that that's wrong. Do I think that that meets the threshold of a crime? For me personally, no. Right. And the reason why I say that, is because I think generally I want a high threshold for intervention when it comes to speech acts. Now, I think that if I were a person photographed in that image and you could identify me, I would certainly consider suing her for libel. I think that you might have a civil case and might reach the civil threshold, but for criminality, maybe not for me. That's not a defense of Alison Pearson, the person, or Alison Pearson, the journalist. For me, it is about thinking about how you, where you set the threshold on hate speech in a way which can facilitate, I guess, the maximum level of freedom of speech with the minimum amount of harm. Now, those two things are obviously in tension with each other, and I understand that people might reach different conclusions, but for me, that's not it.
I pretty much agree with everything you said there, Ash. So we're not going to have a debate on this one, but I've just been looking up Asa Winstanley, his home getting raided, which I think was an outrage. Barely anyone covered it. We covered it on this show. So if you Google us and you can't find it, but if you watch our show from that day, you'll see that we discussed it. But yeah, it's the National covered it, the Morning Star, but the Guardian, the BBC, sort of no one mentioned that, and there's been a number of occasions like this. So it does definitely seem sort of like the outrage is disproportionate when it comes to Alison Pearson compared to other cases of journalists getting the police knocking on their door. But I do agree with you that I don't think this should meet the threshold. And also, it does seem like a big error for the police. There is a crisis of confidence in the police at the moment from pretty much all sides, right? And especially there is a narrative building up on the right that the police clamp down on right wingers and people tweeting offensive stuff and don't deal with actual crime. And it is getting to a point now where lots of people have had an experience. I haven't personally, but sort of I see on Twitter people I know and trust sort of saying, their phone got stolen. They can tell the cops where it is because they've got it on Find My Phone. They can sort of tell them the address, and then the police say, "Well, sorry, there's nothing we can do about that." And they say we don't go to addresses if they're on estates, and people with bikes as well. So bikes getting nicked, they say, "Oh, we can't look through the whole CCTV because we don't have time." And people do look at the police and say, "Why the hell are they knocking on the door of a Daily Telegraph comment journalist for an offensive?" And I agree. I think it's a racist tweet. Why are they doing that when they can't investigate actual? Well, I say actual. What most people think of as a sort of an actual physical crime, let's say.
I mean, look, I think a couple of things. The first thing is that I don't necessarily think that it should have been a matter for the police. But if the Telegraph was a serious newspaper, I think they should have sacked her. Right? Mm-hmm. I think they should have sacked her because if you hire someone as a journalist, I think that they have to have, a basic commitment to telling the truth. All right. Now, obviously, that's going to be subject to interpretation, but where facts are indisputable and a journalist has I think quite egregiously departed from those facts in a way which I think is in this case very racist. I think it's fine to say, all right, that passes the threshold. I think you should be sacked, especially if they haven't apologized for it. Now, you have said yourself the tweet's been taken down. I don't know whether she's apologized for this, but I think an apology would be the absolute minimum for keeping your job there. Similarly, I've had my own experiences with, shall we say, famous journalists being egregiously racist and indeed keeping their column writing position at the Telegraph when that happened. I don't take that paper particularly seriously, although I should correct myself. I think it was the Sunday Telegraph. I don't take that paper seriously. I don't think they take racism seriously, and I think that they'll go as far as they can in protecting their journalists no matter how badly they behave. That's my take on them as an institution from at least 2 instances that I can think of. But I think when it comes to this thing about the police, like I've always really struggled personally on when to involve the police with some of the things that I experience. There has been one occasion where I've made a report to the police, and that's when someone messaged me on Instagram to say, I'm going to come round to your house and cut off your head. And I didn't chase it up. Maybe I should have chased it up. Maybe I should have like pushed far and tried to get a conviction. But I think that ultimately when it got to the point they were like, hey, do you want to come in for like a really full interview? I was just a bit like, I don't know how much I want this hanging over my life anymore. But that's just a completely random and arbitrary example, right? It's like you get so much of it. And that ranges all the way from like you politically disagree with me and you're saying that in a particularly aggressive way, right? I'm not going to call the police over that, to things which are just outright lies. So, a couple of weekends just gone, someone accused me of being a Holocaust denier. He said that I think that your tweet is akin to Holocaust denial. He said that publicly, but DM'd me to say, oh, being a Holocaust denier, not a good look. And I was like, I will fucking sue you. Do you understand? I'm not fucking around. I will sue you. And there's that where I'm like, this lie feels so egregious, I'm going to take action on it. And then there's all this other stuff where it's like, like it's easy when someone calls you a packy. Do you know what I mean? Like that's easy, right? It's easy when someone says, I'm going to chop your head off. That's easy. But when you've got just like this, I don't know how to phrase it, but it's like contextualizing you in such a way and always lumping you in with like child sex abusers or violent anti-Semites or jihadists or whatever, and they're putting your person in that context again and again and again. It almost doesn't seem right to me that's just fine, that there isn't a sort of societal sanction for it. And I can understand that you sort of go, well, that does breach the my personal threshold of criminality, because this is having a real impact on me. Like I can see how people get there. I don't think that that's where the law should be sat, but I can understand why people turn to it when the other institutions aren't operating as they should. I realize I'm rambling a bit, and maybe it wasn't right to go like, oh, this is how I try and think about it, or this is how I try and deal with it. But I suppose when I see something like that, I can understand why someone made that report. I just don't think that that's the threshold the law should be set at.
No, I mean, I didn't find that rambling at all. I thought that was really, really interesting. And I always have so much time to hear about your experience online because I just know it's 1,000 times worse. Sometimes I'm mildly irritated on X, whereas you're getting vile, racist, misogynist abuse and people telling you they're going to cut your head off, right? So it's just a million miles from, I think, what the vast majority of people experience. So it's very, I think, important and useful for you to speak publicly about that. Because I suppose I do have a tendency to think like, why are the police occupying themselves with this? Let people say shit on Twitter. And I think you have, very expressly articulated how it's actually a little bit more complicated than that.